Hey guys, Matt here from 2A Cops, Cops Supporting Gun Rights. And do you guys remember Michael Fanone? You may not remember his name, you probably remember his face. He's the full bearded, neck tattoo DC cop who came to prominence during the January 6 hearings, talking about how he almost died because of the whole thing. Granted, he had a heart attack, which is probably why he almost died. But anyway, so now he's no longer a cop, doesn't work for DC police anymore. He works for CNN, and he wrote an opinion piece about how you should not own an AR-15. So stand by, we'll get into that here in just a second. But before we start dissecting his opinion piece, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Get this content out there to your friends. Let them know that not all the cops out there are wanting to take their guns away like the liberal media wants them to believe. Speaking of the liberal media, let's get into this. So Michael Fanone is a paid analyst with CNN. And he wrote this opinion piece, which they promptly published. And the title of that opinion piece is, "Here's the reason people tell me they want to buy an AR-15, and it's simply ludicrous." So let's talk about this. Let me throw my glasses on here, because I don't want to misquote him. Second paragraph, he ends it with, this is very early on in this, he originally starts out just talking about the AR-15, and then he ends his intro with, "And one thing I know for sure is that this weapon doesn't belong in the hands of the average civilian." So he's already telling you what you should and shouldn't have, one guy's opinion. And what's he base that opinion on? Let's get into this. He touts himself as an NRA member and a hunter. That doesn't really mean anything when it comes to gun ownership and gun rights. There's lots of NRA members who are hunters who think people shouldn't own AR-15s. He happens to be one of them. So let's get into this real quick. He talks about his history in law enforcement, that he's worked part-time at gun stores and sold guns. I have a longer career in history in law enforcement. I work in a gun store, so we have a little bit of a similar background there. He talks about being a firearms trainer. I'm also a certified firearms instructor. So background-wise, I had more time on than he did before he left law enforcement. However, I'm not getting paid by a liberal news outlet. I'm just here doing this of my own accord. So let's talk about this. He says, "I've pressed some customers about why they want an AR-15, but no one ever could come up with a legitimate justification for needing that particular weapon." Apparently, he is under the assumption that the Second Amendment is a part of the Bill of Needs, not the Bill of Rights. It doesn't matter what he thinks someone should have a reason for. They don't have to prove a need to want a certain weapon. That's not up to him. His comment here is based on his background working in a gun store. He says, "Some gun buyers have been misled into thinking that an AR-15 is somehow practical for self-defense, but frankly, it's the last gun I would recommend for that purpose." Okay, it may be the last gun he would recommend for that purpose, but that's because he doesn't like AR-15s. There are lots of people, myself, Keith, here at 2A Cops, lots of people that work in gun stores, lots of people in the gun industry, lots of people with a lot more background than him who do recommend an AR-15 for a self-defense weapon. There's reasons for that. And his reasons for suggesting it's not appropriate, I'm going to dive into right now because they're all based on falsehoods. So let's get into the justifications for why he thinks people shouldn't own AR-15s. The first one he jumps into here is, I'm going to call it lie number one. Factual inaccuracy number one. He talks about the North Hollywood bank robbery shootout in 1997. So I'm going to read this because I don't want to misquote him. "In that incident, two individuals clad in body armor held up a bank in the Los Angeles neighborhood. Police who responded at the scene literally had to run to a nearby gun store to purchase more powerful weapons because they were using 9mm pistols while the bad guys were armed with semi-automatic rifles." Okay, he's about 10 years younger than me, so maybe he wasn't old enough to remember what happened in the North Hollywood shootout. I obviously wasn't working there. I worked in Sacramento, but I was a cop at the time, and I vividly remember what happened in the North Hollywood shootout. I've watched multiple documentaries on it. There's tons of video on it. You can go online and watch video on it on YouTube. They were not using semi-automatic rifles. They were not just clad in body armor. They had made like full body armor suits out of multiple layers of Kevlar. The rifles they were using were fully automatic. They had multiple 100-round drum mags for the guns. They had multiple guns. Their car had extra guns in the car. So as they left the bank, they were fully armored. They were using fully automatic weapons, and they were shooting at the cops, who absolutely were outgunned. I don't disagree with him on that. His description of what the suspects had is completely inaccurate. They literally had to run to a nearby gun store to purchase more powerful weapons. They did go to nearby gun stores. They didn't purchase them. The gun stores happily handed over guns for the cops to use. But those cops that ended up going to the gun stores to get those guns, they didn't end up using them. The guys were put down, one of them by an officer with a 9mm handgun, despite the fact that he's saying 9mm handguns weren't going to stop those guys. Well-placed shots stopped the guy. It didn't matter what caliber it was. Officer with a 9mm handgun put one of the suspects down, and then the other suspect was put down by guys from the SWAT team who arrived who had their AR-15s. So moving on from that, let's move on to factual inaccuracy number 2. He says, the bullet that comes out of an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle can easily penetrate the target, the intruder, or whatever person you are using deadly force against to protect yourself and others from, but it will also go through the wall behind that person and potentially through that room and into the next wall. It's far more powerful than should ever be in the hands of the average civilian. Okay, I'm really starting to question this guy's, I'm a firearms instructor, because nothing he said there is accurate. I will put on the screen here penetration tests comparing the rounds fired by an AR-15, which will include both .223 and .556, and then I will put 9mm handgun rounds, and you can see the difference in depth of penetration. The 9mm penetrates far deeper than the .223 or .556 round does. That is the reason, the overpenetration by the 9mm is the reason that SWAT teams across the country have moved away from their 9mm subguns. They've taken their MP5s and they've ditched them, and they've moved to AR-15s, short-barreled, 10-inch, 12-inch AR-15s that they are using for entries. And the reason they did that is because 5.56 or .223 does not penetrate or overpenetrate nearly as much as a 9mm does. So his basis for thinking that people don't need these for home defense is because he doesn't want the bullets going through the bad guy and through the wall and through the other wall and into other people. Well, it's sorry, that's completely inaccurate. That's not what happens. It's a common misconception, but it's definitely a misconception. So moving on from that. Then he says, the bullet fired by the AR-15 is capable of defeating the average police officer's body armor. Yep, it is. So is every other rifle round. He throws this gem in there. And magazines that can feed dozens of rounds into the weapon in the space of minutes clearly were meant for the use only on the battlefield. Not sure what handguns DC police carry. Most likely a Glock. The majority of agencies in the United States carry a Glock. They were probably issued Glock 17s. The Glock 17 is capable of putting dozens of rounds out of the gun within minutes. Every semi-auto handgun is capable of doing that. Glock 17s, you can get a 33-round magazine for them. His justification for not having a AR-15 is, again, based on falsehoods. Then he jumps into here with factual inaccuracy number 3. And of course, he's pointing to Uvalde, the shooting at the school there. And he says, I have no doubt that police in Uvalde wish they had had weapons as powerful as the one carried by the shooter who snuffed out the lives of those victims in that school. So he's asserting that the cops in Uvalde didn't have AR-15s. That, again, is completely factually inaccurate.
Sees the man down the hall. Then, at 11:33, the first barrage of gunfire, the child runs back to hide. 3 minutes later, the first officers arrive. 2 of them approach the classrooms.
They had rifles on scene. They didn't enter for an hour. So the rifle was not the issue. The fact that the cops in Uvalde completely failed to do what their job was, that was the issue. It had nothing to do with the fact that they were outgunned. They far outgunned the suspect. So again, his basis for AR-15s shouldn't be around, civilians shouldn't have them, is based on mistruths, untruths. All right, so then he goes into his suggestion here. And he says that we should outlaw AR-15s outright. He says, and then I'm going to read this paragraph here. And outlawing these AR-15s would not require confiscating them from people who already have them. Once you've made these weapons illegal, anyone found with one would be subject to arrest, since possession of these weapons would be a crime. I think it is likely that you would see a lot of people opting to turn them in. So he's voting for no grandfathering in. He just wants to outright outlaw AR-15s and make 5 million Americans into felons overnight. That's his suggestion. So yeah, you can see where he's going here. He is no friend to civilians. Well, I take it back. He's probably friends with the civilians he's friends with and agree with him. But if you disagree with him, he wants you to go to prison. His other suggestion, besides outlawing them outright, is to reclassify them as a Class 3 firearm. Class 3 firearm, he's talking about an NFA item. He wants you to have to register your AR-15. And then his justification for suggesting that is once again another lie. I mean, factual inaccuracy. He clearly doesn't own any NFA item. Let me read this and you'll understand why I say that. A Class 3 firearm reclassification would also make those who are approved to purchase these weapons subject to an annual check that they are complying with federal regulations regarding storage, secure storage of the firearm, and to confirm their licensing and other paperwork is up to date. I own a number of Class 3 firearms and I am not subject to an annual check. Secure storage, I don't know what the hell this guy's talking about. Yes, the ATF can show up and ask to see my stuff. They can wait at my front door. I will go get all of my Class 3 items and I will walk them over to the door and show them. They don't get to come in my house and see where I keep them. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And then he finishes off here with, I can't overstate how dangerous it is to have semi-automatic weapons like the AR-15 in the hands of civilians. I'm going to use his word from the title here, he just ludicrously overstated why civilians should not be able to own AR-15s. Everything else I've discussed thus far completely ignores his very dismissive comments regarding people who understand the historical context of the Second Amendment. And so I don't misquote him. I'm going to read this real quick here. Some members of the Tinfoil Hat Brigade have come up with the reply, we need these weapons because we want to be effective against the government if it becomes tyrannical. The Tinfoil Hat Brigade. Yeah, he's very dismissive. That is exactly why the Second Amendment was put in place. Historical context is not arguable. That's why it's there. So he seems to think that it's conspiracy theory material to think that potentially the government could become tyrannical. Apparently he doesn't pay much attention to history. So that's it. Thanks for watching. Again, remember, if you like the content you're seeing here, please like, share, and subscribe. Share this video with your friends. And please always remember your ABCs. Always be carrying.